All embryos start out as clusters of nearly identical cells. But soon, an embryo partitions itself into specialized segments, which develop into the final form of the animal. What controlled this process? How did the embryos know what shape to take? Scientists working with fruit flies had learned how to cause disruptions in the developmental blueprint by dousing growing embryos with radiation and poison.
And so when they did that, they found flies with changed wing structures, changed legs, and these very special flies that have one part of the body in the wrong place, or a copy of a normal part of the body in another place.
The scientists had triggered the changes by damaging the fly's DNA. Within each cell of the developing embryo is a chain-like molecule called DNA. The experiment showed that DNA was somehow causing the embryo to divide into segments. But how? Scientists were just beginning to grasp that the DNA itself was made up of segments, called genes. The question was, how did the genes shape the body? He wrote that each segment of the fly was being directed to grow by a single gene. A small set of genes, a kind of genetic toolkit, appeared to be laying out the entire body.
And as you looked at these genes, you said, this one affects this part of the body, this affects the next part of the body, and this affects the next part of the body. That was an astonishing observation.
It was astonishing because it seemed too simple. Nobody else thought single genes were powerful enough to control something as complex as the structure of the body. If single genes like Antennapedia could define whole segments of an animal, these genes were acting like architects of the body. And if one of these genes turned on in the wrong place, striking changes to the body could result. It seemed that Lavina McGinnis had uncovered the genes responsible for the evolution of bodies.
So what this means is in some ways, some sense, evolution is a simpler process than we first thought. When you think about all of the diversity of forms out there, we first believed that this would involve all sorts of novel creations, starting from scratch, again and again and again. We now understand that no, that evolution works with packets of information and uses them in new and different ways and new and different combinations without necessarily having to invent anything fundamentally new, but new combinations.
Suddenly, the commonality of form among animals was understood. Animals resembled each other because they all used the same set of genes to build their bodies. A set of genes inherited from a common ancestor that lived long ago.
And what we see now among all the animals are just variations on a body plan that existed 500 million years ago.
And there's only one inescapable conclusion you can draw from that, which is if all of these branches have these genes, then you have to go to the base of that, which is the last common ancestor of all animals, and you deduce it must have had these genes. So the whole radiation of animals, the whole spring of animal diversity has been fed by essentially the same set of genes.
It came as a huge surprise, not only to people like my mother, who says, my God, an earthworm and a mouse, an earthworm and me, share things in common, but it came as a surprise to other scientists that there was this profound conservation of mechanism, of building embryos among all these different kinds of animals.